Let's delve into the stock of Microstrategy and what has transpired recently. We'll also touch on Bitcoin. Additionally, we'll discuss volatility, the volatility smile, implied volatility. All of this will bundle together. We'll also add 3D volatility, devise sound strategies, and speculate on where the stock might go. Let's start from the very beginning. We see that there have been elevated volumes on this stock. Over the past few months, it has risen by 300%. That's quite significant. Bitcoin has also seen a good increase, but only by 82%. It's worth repeating that the stock is outpacing Bitcoin by a considerable margin. I immediately overlay Bitcoin onto this stock. As we observe, Bitcoin and this stock have almost 100% correlation. Especially from 2021 to 2022, they closely mirrored each other. But as we can see, at the moment, the correlation has greatly diverged. In other words, the stock is growing much faster than the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. However, I want to draw your attention to the fact that this has happened before. It occurred in February 2021, to be precise. So essentially at this very moment, just 3 years ago. Take a look at this. At that time, Bitcoin also experienced significant growth and MicroStrategy stock showed a very strong correlation, almost 100%. However, as we can see, the outcome was different. The stock corrected itself and began moving in line with Bitcoin. I'll explain later why this occurred. From my personal subjective perspective, I believe the same thing is happening today. In my view, MicroStrategy stock will definitely correct itself and move in line with Bitcoin. To understand why this is happening and why MicroStrategy stock is diverging from Bitcoin, let's look at volatility. Let's start from the beginning. Volatility is currently very high, around 140%. This can be played, and one can sell options intelligently. I'll talk a bit more about this later, how one can profit from it. But again, at the moment, it's very difficult to hedge the stock because the volatility is very high. Let's examine the volatility smile. As we can see, volatility is high across the entire curve, but on the downside, volatility sharply increases. This is where the big players hedge. This also needs to be considered going forward. Let's look at implied historical volatility. Implied volatility is represented by the white line, historical volatility by the gray line. Currently, implied volatility exceeds historical volatility. But I want to say that sooner or later, it will level off and return to its normal values. Therefore, implied volatility will decrease. This can also be played upon. Well, let's think, if volatility decreases, what should the stock do? Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's look at the put and call ratio. In fact, the volumes here are not very large. As we can see, there is a significant volume concentrated around the $2,500 level. And here the distribution is quite uniform. So why is MicroStrategy stock currently outperforming Bitcoin so significantly as it did in 2021? That is, calls were purchased on this stock and a kind of gamma squeeze occurred. Market makers act as sellers of the calls, they earn commissions and spreads. After the market maker sells a call option, they must hedge it by buying shares. The delta neutral hedging strategy is mostly used, meaning they buy as many shares as necessary to stabilize the delta. And this is constantly updated because the strategy is dynamic. Therefore, when the stock started to rise, the delta also started to rise, and consequently market makers needed to buy more and more shares to hedge their sold calls. And in this way, they pushed the stock up. And if Bitcoin continued to rise, then naturally the stock could have continued to rise even higher to $2,000 to $3,000. But in this case, Bitcoin started to fall. Sellers of this stock joined in, and as a result, the price, as we can see, stabilized at these levels. So what can we expect here? Naturally, everything will depend on Bitcoin. I remind you that this company holds a large amount of Bitcoin in its account. And if Bitcoin rises to $100,000, as I've mentioned in previous videos, then the value of Bitcoins on the company's account will be around $20 billion. Naturally, this will push its stock price up. I've already said that the price could reach $2,500, but if we take into account the gamma squeeze and the momentum, it could even break out further to $3,000. But again, at the moment, I don't believe in that. I don't believe that Bitcoin will reach $100,000 anytime soon because we are seeing high interest rates, economic uncertainty, and possibly further liquidity problems. So I currently don't expect Bitcoin to reach $100,000. The question is whether it's worth buying this stock now. I hope MicroStrategy will continue to rise, but honestly, I wouldn't advise buying it. Why buy it for $1,500 when you could buy it for $500? Because in my opinion, if Bitcoin undergoes a correction, then this company will naturally undergo a correction along with it, and perhaps even more sharply. Again, there are growth phases and there are correction phases. I can't say that the company has reached its highs, but again, the risk to reward ratio at the moment is not favorable. This is where you need to understand clearly. I always talk about this, remember. No one can know where the stock will go. I have no idea either. I earn by skillfully forming a portfolio and managing positions. That's what I earn from. And if you learn to do the same, you will also earn. I already manage several portfolios on the side. But in the future, I want to open a completely real account from scratch and demonstrate a real strategy of how I form a portfolio. That's coming a bit later. Write in the comments if you're interested at all, if you're interested in this genre or not. Forming a portfolio from scratch. So let's get back to the company. The risk to reward ratio at the moment is not favorable. What I mean is that the stock may rise to $1,800 to $1,900. Yes, you will profit, but it could also drop very significantly, for example, to $800 or $500. Why take such risks? Of course, if you're day trading, it's a completely different conversation. Here I'm speaking figuratively. That is, I don't know your goals. Whether you're investing for decades ahead or day trading, of course, the situation will be entirely different. I can advise one person to buy and another to sell, depending on what you're involved in. Also, don't forget that Bitcoin trades even on weekends, and there could be an unpleasant situation where stocks are closed for trading on weekends, but Bitcoin, for example, drops significantly. And suddenly on Monday, you could open to see a huge drop in these stocks. There are risks peculiar to each scenario. You can't even set a stop loss here. This aspect needs to be considered as well. Let's look at the 3D volatility and then move on to forming the strategy, as I've mentioned to you before. But the 3D volatility here is quite flat. Professionals will immediately understand how to form a position correctly. You can ignore this peak because the prices have already settled. I'm transitioning to forming some interesting strategy for this stock. But again, I repeat, I strongly advise against blindly following me. I personally won't open such a strategy because it requires true professionalism and I don't need unnecessary hassle. Let's see what we've got. Look, if the strategy is constructed very interestingly, if the company grows to $2,500, we'll get $67,000. Just think about these figures. If the company, for example, drops to $800, we'll get $23,000. Just take a look at it, wherever it goes. The company will either grow or decline, but we'll make money regardless. That's what I'm talking about. I'm telling you about positions like this, where you should learn to make money regardless of which way the stock goes. But again, I won't be opening this position. We need substantial managerial support here. We need truly professional management, constantly buying shares, selling, hedging. If you simply open this stock position, you will definitely lose money. I guarantee it. Because here, there are sold, unsecured options, as well as puts. And if something goes wrong, you will definitely lose money and be deposited with a margin call. I guarantee you that. In general, the best strategy at the moment has nothing to do with this stock. That's because if you buy, hedging the risk through options will be very difficult due to very high volatility. If you short, at any moment Bitcoin could rise and you'll also lose money. Here, you really need to manage the risk with options very, very skillfully. If you're not a professional, honestly, I wouldn't recommend getting involved with this stock at all, because if you haven't lost money, you've already made it. Let's look at Bitcoin, where it could go, but again, I can't predict price movements, even in stocks. I find it very difficult to predict price movements. I always say that I only make money on portfolio formation and management. I don't deny that there are investors and traders who can predict, who can somehow profit from fluctuations in movements. No questions, I simply have a different approach and philosophy. I just make money differently. It's just so comfortable for me, even emotionally. I don't worry about these positions and everything works out great. So regarding Bitcoin, the situation here is even more critical than with stocks because here, in principle, it's impossible to predict where it's heading. Some draw support, some resistance, I understand. I know all these technical indicators, moving averages, lines, Bollinger Bands. It's all interesting, but still, I prefer skillful portfolio management. So with Bitcoin, it's very difficult. Therefore, with this stock too, it's difficult. But if there are any interesting developments, I will definitely keep you informed about what's happening. I also advise you to watch previous videos related to this company. I also analyze what might happen there. Good luck to everyone.